I had, unfortunately, a brush with a really bad individual. But then I began to work with Rizzoli and Isles, that television series, and I've had some really good experience. It's just, unfortunately, a matter of who you end up working with.
Right.
I think that's in any industry. But I have to say, I enjoyed your book more than I enjoyed the movie.
Yeah. There's a new book that's actually out next week, I think. It's called Hollywood versus the Author.
Ooh. Very interesting.
It's a bunch of us novelists who've written a chapter each about our experiences in Hollywood. And I discuss in great detail what happened in my loss in one of those chapters. So if you're interested, it will be available, I think, next week.
Next week?
Definitely have to read that.
Do you know who's putting that out?
The publisher is Rare Bird Books.
Okay.
And I think there are like 12 to 15 authors who each have a contribution about, what it was like for them to sell their ideas to Hollywood.
Oh, great.
That's going to be very interesting.
So just look up Hollywood versus the Author.
Now, today, my favorite book, personally, is The Bone Garden.
Yeah, you know what? That's probably one of my favorite books, too.
Oh, really? Good.
I love that book.
It's a perfect blend of mystery, history, romance, and thriller. How do you keep your storyline straight? Do you use an outline, notes, or do you have a fantastic memory?
You know what? I have tried to outline my stories every time, and every time it never works because the story changes on me. So I think what I do is I just sort of sketch out a game plan, an idea of where the story is going, and then I start to write, and then it sort of happens by itself. The Bone Garden was really one of these unusual stories because nobody was expecting me to write it. I certainly wasn't expecting to write it. It came about because I was asked to do a speech about Mary Shelley. It was the anniversary of Frankenstein. I found out when I was doing my research about Mary Shelley that her mother had died of childbed fever when Mary was just a newborn. And I began to do more research into childbed fever. I knew something about it because of my medical training, but now I was interested in the historical aspect of it. And there is a true horror story. The real picture of what it was like to give birth in a hospital back in the early 1800s. Childbed fever, it's a terrible way to die. You go in and you think you're going to have your baby, and you do have your baby, and yes, you successfully give birth. And then within a couple of hours later to a day or two later, you get this fever. Your abdomen swells up so tautly it hurts that just to move, just to have somebody touch your skin, you start to have these foul-smelling discharges, and then almost invariably you die of massive infection. At times, this was infecting entire wards of maternity hospitals so that they couldn't build the coffins fast enough. There were descriptions of stuffing 2 women to a coffin just to get them out of the rooms and bury them. And there was one report of a small French town where every single pregnant woman died that year, leaving nothing but a village of widowers. You're reading this history, I'm thinking, oh my God, probably the worst part of it is that these women all died because of bad medical care. They were all infected by their doctors. So it was a case of murder by physician. And I wanted to write a story about the history of childbed fever, but I decided to put it in the context of a mystery and to also include an American hero. Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was the father of our Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, was a medical doctor. And he was the first doctor in the United States to really put 2 and 2 together and to tell the Massachusetts Medical Society that it was important for doctors to wash their hands. Doctors weren't washing their hands before then.
Wow.
So simple.
They would go right from the autopsy room where they just cut open a badly infected woman, and they'd come out with their arms covered in pus and bacteria, and then they'd go and do an internal examination of a woman who's in labor. So they would go down the ward, just spreading these horrible bacteria from woman to woman to woman, killing everybody there. Because, as one doctor was quoted as saying back then, we are gentlemen, and gentlemen do not have unclean hands. So they couldn't, there was no concept among these doctors that they could be responsible. Think about how many thousands of lives Oliver Wendell Holmes saved by telling doctors, you need to wash your hands. So anyway, he appears as a character coming as he's putting 2 and 2 together. In the meantime, he's also solving the case of a serial killer in 1820s Boston. So that was how it all came about. It was had to give a speech about Mary Shelley.
Wow.
Amazing.
Now, you've talked about one way that you've come up with ideas for books. How do you keep it fresh? And as a side, what authors inspire you?
Well, the way to keep it fresh is to just continually be interested in what's going on around, to be curious. I think my ideas come, as you can see, from all kinds of crazy places, whether it's A Nightmare in Venice or looking at paintings in Italy or reading about Mary Shelley's mother. I just go through my day and I'll see something and I'll be reading something and I'll just think, oh my God, that's a story. How do I turn this into a story? So you have to always be aware that stories are everywhere. The other thing that really, I think, helps me is I travel a lot. I love to travel. I'm a lifelong tourist. And I find that when I'm in an unfamiliar environment, I'm taking in things. Sometimes stories pop out of that. I find Italy an unending source of inspiration. And I think I've also picked up stories, just for instance, traveling on book tour. I remember there was one night I landed very late at an airport and they sent a car and driver to pick me up. I got into the car and as he's driving me to my hotel, it suddenly occurred to me, I have no idea who this man is. What if he's not the person who's actually supposed to pick me up? What if I got into the wrong car? And so that became a book right there. It's just really paying attention to the things that freak you out, because the things that freak you out are the things that make good stories.
So can you touch a little bit on how difficult was it to get your first book published?
Things have changed a lot since I got my first book. I sold my first book in 1987, actually. And that was back when you pretty much, you typed out your chapters, you put them in an envelope and you mailed them somewhere.
You were a teenager.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was before fax machines. It was before email. It was before a lot of stuff. In a way, it was kind of a gentlemanly, very slow-paced way of publishing. What I did was I was sending stuff into the slush pile. I was mailing my manuscripts, and I remember I sent a manuscript to Harlequin Intrigue because I had read a couple of books in their line, and that was romantic suspense. And at the same time, I sent the manuscript to a literary agent, and I got contacted by both at the same time. So it was like I picked up an agent and a publisher simultaneously, but it was through the slush pile. Nowadays, I would say that you can do it by email. You can do it all electronically. And the way to do it is either to pitch it to an agent at a meeting, for instance, talk to them, maybe give them a 1 or 2 minute pitch about what your story is about. And if they like the idea, they'll say, send me your manuscript. And then it goes from there. If you don't get a chance to meet agents to pitch verbally, I think the way to do it is a query letter. And a query letter is just a 1 to 2 page single space letter where you describe your story, who you are, ask, would you like to see the manuscript? And depending on that query letter, the agent will say yes or no. And then it goes from there. I would say that the most important writing a writer can do is a good query letter, because that's what gets an agent's interest. I still believe that literary agents are really, really useful. I mean, my agent, she fights for me every day. She is fighting for me constantly. And I would never be where I was without my literary agent. They take a commission. She's worth every penny, and she's earned me multiple times more than I would have earned on my own without an agent. But now there are alternative ways, and that's why I say things have changed. I mean, you can self-publish. You can.
Yes.
Some people make a living. I mean, I know some people who actually probably make a pretty good living without an agent and just selling directly to Kindle. So it's a really interesting time in publishing, a very democratic time where every writer can be published.
Now, do you have any new books or events coming up that you'd like our listeners to know about?
Well, I have a book coming out next year. It's already finished. We're still unsure about what to call it. The title is up in the air. You'd be amazed how hard titles are to come up with. But the story is, all I can say is, maybe you remember this wonderful old black and white movie called The Ghost and Mrs. Muir.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So I love that. I love that story. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take off from that because I live in Maine, where there's a lot of sea captains' houses around here. And I thought, what if a troubled woman goes to Maine for the summer and rents a sea captain's house? And of course, the sea captain is still there, even 150 years later. And she falls in love with him. And they have this great erotic love affair. But what if she learns that every woman ever lived in that house has died in that house? And what if she begins to wonder whether this is truly a sea captain, or whether she's imagining him, or whether she's going crazy, or whether she's living with a demon, or whether there is somebody who's flesh and blood who is killing people? So it all started with The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, and it took a very dark turn.
Sounds very gothic.
I've got to read that one.
I used to love Gothic novels, so I guess I would call it an erotic modern Gothic novel.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely
We are
look out for
looking
that.
forward to that. Ghost and Mrs. Muir was one of my favorite TV shows.
And I loved the movie, too, with Rex Harrison. Oh, that was...
Yeah, well, just imagine what a great lover a ghost would be and how perfect he would be, because there would be no STDs, no pregnancy, and no dirty socks to pick up. So.
Right, exactly.
That sounds, just about perfect. Well, Tess, we thank you so much for coming on our program, and we wish you all the best in your future books. And I do have a question for you. First of all, I want to tell you that we sat in on your talk at the National Book Festival in Washington.
Oh, okay, right.
Yes. So we very much enjoyed that. Are you going to Malice Domestic this year?
No, I'm not. I'm doing a lot of personal travel this year and trying to see all the places in the world that I want to see before I die.
And finding new books.
Right, new inspiration.
So yes, travel away. If you write some of the books that you've written, please travel away. We wish you the best in all of your books and in travels, and I hope you don't get snowed in up in Maine.
Well, thank you very much. This was a pleasure.
Thank
Okay.
you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
She was great. I enjoyed that very much. She was very gracious.
That is so true. I am so happy to be able to meet some of these authors and be fangirl.
And I'm also excited to hopefully one day get to meet her in person. I feel like this is opening doors for us that we never dreamed would be opened.
That's for sure.
That is so true.
Well, that brings us to the end of another In Agatha's Footsteps, and that was a good one.
And if you'd like to check out our other In Agatha's Footsteps with names like Alan Bradley,
Victoria Thompson,
Hank Philippi Wright.
visit our website at itwasadarkandstormybookclub.com.
and remember,
Life would be boring without a little mystery.
bye.